Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're not treating our source text like some dry academic paper. Instead, we are stepping into a stark, almost graphic novel-style mythic fable. We're going to witness a lifelong believer, an inquisitor, undergoing a profound, ground-shaking spiritual identity crisis as he interrogates a figure known only as the Dark Sage. Along the way, we're going to unearth some deeply rooted philosophical threads tying together biblical philosophy, existentialism, and modern nihilism. It's quite the journey. We're plunging straight into the dark, contemplative atmosphere of what's called the second sitting. Picture this. We're adopting the urgent, really cynical internal monologue of the Inquisitor himself. He's looking at the sage, the very man he came to interrogate, and observing an absolute unnatural stillness. The Inquisitor actually asks him if this is the stillness of the dead or just the stillness of a man who has simply given up hope of ever finding what he's waiting for. Now, the Dark Sage responds to this, and his answer is, well, it's haunting, really. He makes this razor-sharp distinction. He tells the Inquisitor, calmly, that he hasn't stopped living at all. He has only stopped mistaking waiting for living. Now, for the Inquisitor, a guy who has spent his entire life waiting on cosmic justice, waiting on divine answers, waiting for some grand finale, this statement is a massive shock to the system. The sage, he realizes, no longer flinches from fires he didn't even light. All right, moving into section 1. One man in 3 coats. Here's where it gets really fascinating. The Inquisitor realizes he hasn't been tracking 3 different heresies to burn at the stake. No, he's been tracking one man, or rather, one evolving philosophy, wearing 3 different coats across history. It's a literal pilgrimage of subtraction. First, he traces it back 3,000 years to Jerusalem, where a threadbare, honest man counts the world's wages and finds them totally unequal to his labor. Then, the coat travels to the colder climate of Copenhagen about a century and a half ago, where the man no longer even bothers counting wages. He just signs for his life with trembling hands. And finally, it lands right here in our modern century. The man has stopped needing an address entirely. He just stands, completely unbothered, in whatever room is left standing. To put that into perspective, think about the ancient biblical lament of Qoheleth from Ecclesiastes. That was an active, pacing grief. It had a pulse. He was shouting at the sun, desperate to be heard. Contrast that with the modern nihilistic mask. Our century doesn't write psalms, right? We write case studies. The modern man doesn't lament, he just reports the death of meaning. Kind of like a doctor reporting a death that was expected for months. There's no cruelty of surprise left. The Inquisitor suddenly realizes his own faith has traveled this exact same distance without him even noticing. The quiet that followed the ancient shouts wasn't a surrender. It was just punctuation. Which brings us to section 2, the empty house of burnout. So the sage uses this ethereal, philosophical metaphor of an empty house. And man, does this crash violently into our modern reality. Think about the sheer relatability of the number 40 here. The Inquisitor thought this was just some preacher's flourish until he started seeing it everywhere. Imagine watching someone refresh an unanswered digital letter, an email, 40 times in a single hour. They are absolutely, desperately certain that the next refresh will finally produce the reply their labor is owed. It is, literally, shouting uselessly into a digital room with no one home. What we're looking at is ancient, existential dread, perfectly translated into modern digital stress. Because, let's be honest, the stressor is rarely the actual work itself. Instead, it's this unexamined expectation that our work is owed a specific echo. We expect the universe, or, our boss, our inbox, our peers, to echo back our value. And the crisis hits hard when that echo never arrives. You realize the house is completely empty. This totally redefines how we look at modern burnout. The Inquisitor grasps that burnout isn't just a medical malfunction you can fix with a good night's sleep or a spa day. It is a profound, devastating philosophical realization of cosmic absence. It's the exhaustion of running a private accounting department in your head that you didn't even know was there. You're tallying up your unacknowledged sacrifices, assuming the universe is quietly recording your merit. The collapse? That happens the moment you realize the ledger never existed in the first place. And this perfectly highlights the cruel intimacy of a random Tuesday inbox. 3,000 years ago, the biblical writer Qoheleth diagnosed this exact same collapse. He called it vanity, treating it as profound cosmic data discovered through Scripture. Today, a modern clerk discovers that exact same ancient truth through a lack of emails. But what's wild is that our modern clinics and insurers treat this profound existential realization merely as a treatable syndrome, just a malfunction to patch up so the worker can get back to the assembly line. The Inquisitor dryly notes that maybe our clinics should read a little less Freud and a lot more Ecclesiastes. Okay, Section 3. Peace through radical subtraction. As the Inquisitor descends further into the sage's silence, he hits the philosophical core of this calm. He asks the obvious question: how on earth does a man arrive at peace by subtracting things? I mean, addition never balances a scale that's built on a false unit of measure. So, the sage subtracts. Step 1. He removes the ancient promise of a reward proportional to virtue. Step 2. The existential removal of a stable self that can even be fairly judged. And finally, Step 3. The ultimate nihilistic removal, stripping away the promise that our losses mean anything whatsoever to a listening universe. Step by step, the believer is stripped down to nothing owed, nothing expected. It's a descent into pure silence. Now, this is a massive departure from pretty much every faith the Inquisitor has ever administered. Every religion, every corporate ladder, they always promise peace as something added. It's grace stacked upon grace, a bonus stacked upon a salary, an achievement stacked right on top of your labor. But for the Dark Sage, calm only arrived when that false ledger was completely destroyed. The calm isn't a reward. It's simply the absence of the exhausting labor of waiting. And right here, we witness the total breakdown of a lifelong certainty. The Inquisitor has spent decades trained to spot the lie in a man's confession. But staring at the sage, he finds absolutely no lie. All he finds is an increasingly precise refusal to be comforted by one. The entire transaction of faith has been inverted. And finally, Section 4, the quiet vigil. You know, what's amazing is how the Inquisitor's own career arc mirrors that exact 20th century philosophical thinning we just explored. 40 years ago, he began his office with the absolute zeal of a crusade, utterly certain the cathedral could reach heaven. Then, 20 years ago, doubt crept in. He started questioning the architect, though he was still secretly checking the blueprints, hoping to find a divine signature. And now, present day, he arrives at a quiet vigil. That old burning zeal has thinned out into a clinical, unhurried attention. So the Inquisitor basically drops his role as judge entirely. He came to this room carrying a file, fully prepared to issue a verdict, maybe even light a fire. But he realizes that asking whether this thinning of faith is a tragic loss or a peaceful arrival is in itself the very last piece of false hope he had left to spend. He chooses quiet observation over delivering any final judgment. Instead of sentencing the sage, the Inquisitor just decides to sit with him in the silence. And honestly, it forces all of us to look at our own ledgers, our own daily burnout, and ask this stark, haunting question. Is the empty house really as uninhabitable as our training always insisted it must be? Or is there a radical, quiet peace waiting for us once we finally stop mistaking waiting for living? Definitely something to think about the next time you find yourself refreshing an inbox, waiting for an echo that just isn't coming.